modify it a little bit, and put it in the House budget proposal. And that does three basic things. It brings the growth rate from 8% to 2%, back down to what is manageable. Secondly, just like a member of Congress gets, anyone who turns 65 gets a booklet in the mail and said, you choose, as an individual, what kind of benefit you want. And the government doesn't send you a voucher to you directly. They send $15,000 or more, depending on your financial status, to the entity.
The entity being a private insurance company.
That is government approved and sponsored, just like members of Congress. I remember a couple of years ago, people were asking, why can't we have the benefits that members of Congress have? Now that's been offered, and there's still a segment of people who don't like that. That's okay. I appreciate that there's differences of opinion.
What will happen to people under 55, the people, our sons and daughters who are 40 years old now and 50?
Okay, that's me. I'm 40. So here's what happens to me. Under the, if this passed, now it's got to pass the Senate, it's got to pass, signed into law by the President. If that were the case, me, I'm 40 now, when I turn 65, or about 6 months before I turn 65, I get a book in the mail that says pick and choose the benefits you want.
In other words, private corporations get in
No.
Medicare.
The federal government picks and chooses administrators and plans. They are approved by the federal government. They then send me a book as an individual, as an American, and they say, you pick and choose what you want, you send us that book back. Then the government pays for those services to the tune of $15,000. It's a sliding scale for those who can't afford it. You actually could get more depending on what your income is at that point. You can get 18, 19, 20,000. What that does is, like Medicare Part D, brings greater level of competition to the senior, gives greater flexibility to the senior. That plan passed the House. It's in the House budget. The Senate has not taken it up, and obviously the President has not considered it because it hasn't passed the Senate. My point would be this. If we all agree that it's going bankrupt, so if you believe the Medicare trustees that Medicare is going bankrupt in 12 years, and because of that you'd like us to solve the problem, but you don't like this proposal, let's see other proposals come from members of Congress. I am willing to look at any proposal that comes forward, but we haven't seen a proposal. But I think it's imperative that we make sure we solve the problem, because if we don't, it'll be a failure on behalf of every elected official for every recipient and future recipient. And that's something that I don't think is good public policy for the country. Yes.
A couple of questions. One about Social Security, and I think that probably applies to most of us here. It's always been my impression that Social Security was a retirement program for seniors. From its origin during 1933 or whatever it was to now, we've all made contributions over our working lifetime. For some reason, I now get the impression that the Social Security payouts are loaded with fat that goes to various welfare programs that have nothing to do with senior retirement.
That's true.
And why can't, I mean, since supposedly they can segregate Social Security income, which is, they don't any longer, but it's one of the single largest sources of income to the government, why can't they segregate it and treat it like it was supposed to be treated to begin with? Number one. Number two is a 12-person commission is going to sit down and reduce and produce, what, $1.9 trillion worth of reductions. 12 people composed of the same people who couldn't come to any agreement on anything are now going to be asked to come to an agreement to cut $1.9 trillion in costs out of the government. Why can't it be turned over to 12 people who have no relationship to politicians at all, and just let them look at it and say, this is reasonable, this is unreasonable?
There was a lot of debate about this joint committee of 12. It's 6 on the House side, 6 on the Senate. So it'll be 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, 3 from each minority and majority. I didn't think that that was the best and smartest way to go. I would have preferred something long-term and substantial. That's why I co-sponsored Cut, Cap, and Balance. That far exceeded the $4 trillion that everybody was talking about in order to ensure that there was no change in a bond rating. Unfortunately, we couldn't win that battle in the Senate. And when you have divided government, you don't necessarily get the best piece of legislation. You get what ultimately can pass. And there is a fundamental problem with that process, but that is our process. My preference would be to have made an agreement on that. It's about $1.5 trillion that they're supposed to come up with. I mean, they can come up with more if they want. But it is going to be, I think, difficult for this group of 12. Except that I think the eyes of not just the country but the world are watching this group of 12. Will be announced within the next week who they are. And you're right, there will be ideological differences with those 12 people that will be just as significant as you saw during this last 3-4 weeks in our debt ceiling debate. What I hope is those 12 individuals recognize the weight of their responsibility and find enough common ground. But what it's going to take is a very different approach between when they're named next week and through November, compared to what you saw in the last month. What you saw in the last month was a lot of rhetoric. I mean, every night when you came, you turned the TV, no matter what channel it was, both sides, you saw a lot of rhetoric. That has to stop. The president's going to have to engage on a different level as well. So I hope that they can come to a reasonable agreement. Whatever agreement they come to does go to the House and the Senate. The reason that the sequestration component was put in there, that if they don't come to an agreement, that there are automatic cuts, is the theory is nobody likes those automatic cuts. Therefore, that will be the driving factor as to why they will come up with something that is reasonable. The other component here is the first $917 billion, which is cut on discretionary, almost doesn't guarantee, but really requires either tax reform or entitlement reform to happen in that second component. It's going to be extremely difficult to come up with another 1.5. There's just not in order to come up with another 1.5, you got to get below the 08 spending levels on discretionary, which is roughly where we are right now. We went back to 08 discretionary. You got to get back to like 2000, 1998. I don't think people feel that would ever happen. So the hope is that they will come up with some greater reform. And the fact that now S&P has acted, they're not done, nor is Fitch, nor is Moody's. I mean, they're still watching this process. All the more reason to get serious and get this done and get it accomplished. I can't tell you how it's going to turn out, but I am hopeful that group will do the right thing. With that being said, had I had it my way, it would have been cut, cap, and balance. It would have been a very strong piece of legislation. The country would have known what direction we're going in. We would be having a debate right now on whether the balanced budget amendment is a good thing or a bad thing for our country. Yes.
Representative Guinta, the question I have, I'm going to paint with a broad brush. It isn't specifically intended for you, but it's intended for the House of Representatives and Congress alike. How can a bunch of millionaires wearing Brooks Brothers suits understand what the needs of the people in this room happen to be? When they make decisions based on their own self-interest first, and then they think about the people in the room down in New Hampshire. And I think that's very unfair, and I think that's the breakdown in our government, is they're not relating to the real people in this room that don't own suits and have $1 million in the bank.
Well, I think the best way to answer your question is that if we want to have change in how our government works, we need to start looking at things like term limits, not just for people who are elected, but also for bureaucrats in Washington. I mean, we had this debate, and I heard from a lot of people when I was campaigning for this position. And I came down on the side of this should be about service. It shouldn't be about a career. I serve 2 terms in the state legislature. I was twice elected in the state legislature. I served 2 terms as alderman. I served 2 terms as mayor. I never went in to those positions knowing how long I was going to serve. But as I was able to get things accomplished, particularly when I was mayor, I decided, you know, after 2 terms, I'd accomplished enough of what I thought was necessary to put the city on a firmer footing, and then let somebody else do what they think, bring new ideas, different approach, good, bad, or indifferent. I feel serving in Washington, I serve as your representative.
So does that mean you're going to only serve 1 term?
I'm not going to make an announcement today on whether I decide to run for the election, but I will say this: it is up to the people that I represent whether they send me or somebody else. But I think more important than that is the sense of having term limits, making everyone in Congress abide by serving for a closed period of time, because I think that that is the fundamental change that takes politics out of decisions and puts good, thoughtful thinking into decisions. Now, you know, look, if you took a poll today, I'm sure half the people are happy with my vote on the debt ceiling, and the other people are not. I could have easily just, I guess, voted president. I guess maybe I just would have made nobody happy. But that's not the way I see my responsibility. I see my responsibility is to take votes, to get input, which I did, and the only reason I was doing so many tele-town hall meetings last month is I wasn't back in New Hampshire to do face-to-face meet and greets. So I spent a lot of time calling a lot of people in New Hampshire and listening to what people had to say. I have to say, when the President of the United States said in his press conference, call your congressman, that was the best thing for us, because we got a lot of input from a lot of people. And if you want to know, we got about 400 to 500 calls. We got over 1,000 emails. And I'll tell you what the majority of those said. I mean, you had positions all over. You had raise the debt ceiling cleanly, don't raise the debt ceiling, period. But the 3 themes of that information that we got, and we only considered New Hampshire, we didn't consider people outside of New Hampshire, because we got calls from people outside of New Hampshire too. What people were saying is, don't raise taxes. If you remember, at that point there was a lot of discussion about whether taxes were going to be raised. Come to an agreement and reduce spending. Those were the 3 basic themes that we got out of those calls. And it did help me, in addition to the outreach that I was doing. But the best way to fundamentally change our system is to send people who feel that it's a responsibility to serve and not a lifetime or a career. And I think if that's up to people in each individual district, in each individual state. I know let me go to you, and I'll try to get everybody before we go.
What committees and subcommittees are you serving on, and what legislation are you working on?
Sure. I'm on 3 committees. I'm on budget. Being on 3 is a little unique. I'm on budget, I'm on transportation and infrastructure, and then I'm on oversight and government reform. So budget, we craft the House budget. Transportation, we deal with transportation infrastructure, not just for New Hampshire, but all across the country. And oversight and government reform is the committee that is essentially is responsible for how your dollars are spent. And the idea is reforms are supposed to be coming out of that committee to improve how dollars are spent. And then I've got several subcommittees. The most important of the subcommittees are probably the oversight that I have on finance and